Welcome to the People Prescription. This is your right dose of People Ops wisdom. Hi, folks. In today's podcast, we're going to be covering health and safety and HR. We're really here to offer you a bit of a no-fluff introduction to begin with, a bit of a too long didn't read intro, so we can kick off the episode and make sure that, from an understanding perspective, you know what we're talking about. HR and health and safety aren't two separate silos. They actually overlap, folks, in ways that most business leaders don't even realize until something goes wrong. In this episode, we're going to break down for you 3 key crossover points from employee well-being, training, and incident investigations. We'll show you where the real risks are hiding and how to fix those particular gaps, and why joined up thinking between HR and health and safety isn't just smart, it's essential. What are your thoughts on that, Darren?
Exactly what you've said, Richard. It's about getting things in place before something happens, because it's less costly. But it's about education. It's educating the employees, it's about educating the business owners, the directors, and supporting them. So we're going to be talking about mental health and well-being. That's not just the employees, that's the business owners, the directors as well. It's all about people, businesses, people. Richard or myself will quite happily speak to you about it, no obligation at any time.
Absolutely. Today we've got Darren Bedson with us from BPA Services. He's the Managing Director of BPA since 2008. I'm Richard Tunnicliffe. I'm the founder of Order Employment Services. We're a managed HR service provider based in Stoke-on-Trent, as is Darren. And today we are talking about where HR meets health and safety, the overlap nobody talks about. So we're going to go through today, essentially, some of the key areas of health and safety in HR that not all business leaders are aware of, but they need to be. So today's session is all about putting things on your radar that you may or may not have been aware of. And just to introduce you over to Darren. Hi, Darren. Today we're covering health and safety, the overlap nobody talks about with HR. Have you had any experiences where HR and health and safety have overlapped?
Yeah, first of all, morning, Richard. There's been quite a few in the 25 years I've been doing health and safety. My career path started probably accidentally. I didn't choose to go into health and safety like probably most health and safety people don't. It's just a career path they find themselves. And when I first started, I was a group health and safety manager for a company, which is great because you work your way up from the shop floor and so on. You go on courses and you know everything about that business. And it was good. And I learned a lot from the health and safety side of that. I spent most of my time with the HR manager, to be fair, because there was 200 odd people that worked on that site. And then there was another 4 sites as the group health and safety manager I was looking after as well. So virtually on a daily basis, I was with the HR manager. And the reason being, there's a lot of overlap between health and safety and HR. And I still find it with our retained clients. Now I dip in and out of the HR side of things as well as the health and safety. And it's because a lot of the legislations, even though you've got the employment legislations, you've got the health and safety legislations, there's a lot of things that seem to overlap with policies and procedures, health, safety, well-being, employment, people being off work through ill health and accidents and so on. So the HR plays a big role in that. And I'm not an HR expert. Employment is not what I know about. So I have to rely a lot on the HR people to give me guidance when looking at reviewing risk assessments, policies and things like that to see if it ties in with what their employment contracts are and things like that as well. Yeah, there's a big overlap. I saw it from day one when I first started out on this career. And I'm still heavily involved in HR people for different clients now.
This is the big question then, folks. Where do HR and health and safety actually meet, and what are most business leaders missing? Exactly right, Darren. I think ultimately the compliance is an ever-moving target. The government are constantly changing legislation, the rules essentially that business leaders have to follow in order to run their businesses effectively. And compliance is one of those things that can sometimes take a back seat as a business leader. There's so many things that you're completing, so many tasks that you're focused on. You might not necessarily have the time or the inclination for that matter to focus on compliance. And that's where Darren and I can help. We're there to free your time up so you can focus on those areas that are particularly important for your business, such as growing your organization, making sure that the revenue is where it needs to be. And ultimately, the way you can do that is through people. You need people in order to grow your organization without you doing it all as a business leader. So I'll give you a quick example. Darren mentioned about the changes in legislation. If you'd asked me 20 years ago, could you retire somebody? I would have said yes. You can't do that anymore. As an employer, what we're seeing is a huge rise in inquiries that we receive around medical capability. And that's all about whether or not somebody's actually well enough in order to complete the tasks. It used to be the case that when somebody hit 65, you give them a gold watch, thank them very much for the service, and they'd move on to the next chapter of their life. Whereas now, what we're seeing is there's a lot more people within the workforce that are much more mature. And with that, though, as they're getting older, they're also having complications, medical complications. And that sort of sits in the really setting the scene for today's conversation, which is around employee well-being and also mind health at work. From a HR perspective, it's really important to ensure that as an employer, you're considering things like adjustments to the work. So if somebody's suggesting that they're not well enough to work, whether that be on the grounds of mind health or whether that be on the grounds of physical capability, it's really important that as a business leader, you're considering what options are available to you in order to manage that person at work. And some of the things that we'd suggest that you do initially at OES HR is look at things like your absence management technique. Something as simple as doing a return to work meeting can have a massive impact on whether or not somebody within your workforce is going to take a long time off within that period. It's also important as well to look at what adjustments can be completed for that particular person. Would they need potentially a reduction in hours? Would they need some kind of flexible working arrangement to facilitate them to work in an effective way? And from a HR perspective, they're the first go-to points that we'd consider. What support is required for that particular person, and how can we facilitate that as soon as possible with the business objectives in mind? So as an employer, it's really important that we start with the end in mind, and that's all about making sure that we achieve what the employee is looking for as well. From a HR perspective, that's the first go-to point. Darren, from a health and safety perspective, what areas would you suggest that employers focus on in order to manage things like employee well-being and mind health at work?
It's interesting you say what you just said, Richard, because I am seeing a lot more involvement over the last probably 5 years in the main. Now, I've been seeing since 2000, when we went into the lockdown with COVID and so on, I think there's been a big difference in the working environment. Over the next few years, we'll see, personally, I think we'll see a big diverse way in the way health and safety goes. We've seen a lot more things now concentrating on mental health and well-being. Health and safety, over the years, there's still room for improvement, but I think with the health and safety executive, the excellent work they do, governing bodies, accreditations, we've seen a massive increase in the standards of health and safety, which has been brilliant. As I said, there's always room for improvement. But over the last 5 years, I have seen a big change in the way health and safety professionals need to look at what advice they're giving. And that's where the overlap with HR comes in. We are seeing a lot more lost time with people off with mental health issues. I think managers as well need support. Managers are probably not used to it. You find a lot of managers are people that have showed that they're capable of not just being on the shop floor, and they've worked their way up through their businesses. So they need support. They don't know the employment law. They don't know the health and safety law. You mentioned earlier HR. Loads of legislations, and it's the same with health and safety. You can't know every single one. And I hate the word expert. I never use the word expert. I've been called it lots of times, and I'll say, no, I'm not an expert. Every day's a school day. Yeah. So with things like mental health and well-being, we are seeing a big increase in that. We also have to look at the pressures people face outside work. We have to consider that when they come into work, we don't know if they've got family issues with somebody being ill, finance issues, worried about the job, whatever it could be. We don't know what goes on in people's personal lives, and a lot of people won't tell you. And then what you find then is stress and anxiety and everything builds up. Potentially it could come to an accident or an incident, which obviously is the health and safety side. So what we try to do is prevent that. We try to look at bringing things in, well-being plans and things like that, making sure that clients have got occupational health on board. Following, from an health and safety viewpoint, following the Plan, Do, Check Act, making sure that they're not just looking at the health and safety at work act, but making sure they comply with the management health safety work regulations, the core legislations. There's hundreds of legislations, but if we look at the 5 main ones, then
Yes, yeah.
we're on the right.
Absolutely. So with that in mind then, Darren, so you mentioned about managing health and safety at work regulations. What would be, as an employer, some simple things that they could do to ensure that they're building the sandbags up around the business and protecting it from a potential issue later down the line? I agree. I think one of the things that we do at OES HR is we take the view that prevention is better than cure. We much prefer to prevent a situation than reactively deal with a problem when it comes up. From an employer's perspective, what would be some of the key things that they could do to meet those managing health and safety regulations at work?
The first thing is sit down with a blank piece of paper. Look at what the business is about. Look at the business vision. Look at the business core values. Because it's all led from the top. Doesn't matter what business it is. If it's led from the top, then it'll filter down. So look at the core values. Look at the values. Your biggest value in a business is your people. Without your people, you haven't got a business unless you're a sole trader. So I think you need to look at that first. Sit down, blank piece of paper. What are we about as a company? Where do we want to get to in 12 months, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, and so on? And then sit back and ask yourself the question, okay, I've spent 3, 5, 7 years to get to my 10-year plan, whether it's to have a buyout or retire or move on or whatever it is. But then ask yourself, what happens if I have a major accident or incident on that journey that's going to scupper them plans? And in answer to your question, the key thing for me, as I mentioned, management, health, safety, work regs and so on, plan what you're doing. Check it, constantly checking it. I don't mean put it in a drawer and forget about it. Look at it. Is it working? What needs tweaking? Do we need to look at bringing something else in, changing the process, whatever it is? Now, I know sometimes it costs money, and I totally understand that businesses have to earn money to stay in business. I'm not saying go out there and spend hundreds of thousands of pounds, but there are some quick fixes, things like staff development, training, educating them. It could be in-house, it could be somebody of a senior qualified position in the company that can probably filter that knowledge and experience down to people. It doesn't have to be courses. So there's a lot they can do, but just bear in mind that one accident could scupper them plans. And I think if you put the things in place to show that you're trying, and not just on health and safety, but with HR as well, you're trying, you've got your employment policies in place, you've got your working time directives, you're making sure that you're not stressing people out by expecting to work in their own time and so on. Also look at, going back to the mental health and wellbeing, and I mentioned earlier 5 years, outworking work, sometimes it doesn't, and other times. I do know people that I've spoke to that absolutely hated working from home, but they had no choice. And they moved on to other jobs because they wanted people around them. They wanted their office environment. But I also appreciate that some people do like working from home. So you've got to look at your organisation again, see if it works. Do you need it so people are working at home constantly, or they're working in the office constantly, or can you have a balance where you can do a bit of both?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's something we try and encourage our clients to do at OES HR, which is about trying to find that magic sweet spot for employees. HR isn't so much about policies, it's about people. And we're complex creatures as humans, and it's important to try and find that sweet spot. It's different for each person that you'll be speaking to. Of course, it depends on the context of what work's being done as well. If somebody's working in a factory, heavy machinery, the opportunity to work at home probably isn't going to be there because they need to be on site. They need to be looking after that machinery and on the production line. One thing that we can also share today is just trying to focus on, okay, what actually is the problem that we're talking about? What's the challenge for business leaders? And I find that there's a really good example of this in the HR world involving a case where it was essentially a council, Northumberland City Council. They had a person that was a very senior manager within that council. And the case is called Walker versus Northumberland City Council for anybody that wants to follow up and get a bit more meat on the bone. But to give you a bit of a flavour for what we're talking about here, folks, it's really about, okay, what is the risk for an organisation if they have people that are taking time off with stress-related absences or mind health challenges? And from a cost perspective, what we're talking about today is really trying to find an investment opportunity for business leaders to avoid these costs happening. So what is the cost? So based on this case that we're talking about, this Walker versus Northumberland City Council case, in that particular case, somebody took a lot of time off as a result of high workloads. It was a high pressure environment. And essentially, they resigned on the back of how much stress that they were being put under as a result of the amount of work that they were doing. And to cut a long story short, what happened was they initially took time off ill on the grounds of mind health, on the grounds of stress-related absences. They were then taken through what was referred to as a medical capability process. They were awarded just over £300,000 in compensation, which is a huge chunk of money for many modest-sized business leaders out there. That's the difference between making a profit or not. It could even be the difference between trading or not. So it has a huge impact. And the view that we take, certainly, as Darren was mentioning there a moment ago, is prevention's better than cure. We're there to avoid that situation happening. And in my view, the only way you can avoid that is by investing in the right policies, procedures, processes, and getting the kind of important advice from people like Darren and I, who can guide you through what is an absolute maze of regulations and act as your trusted partner to do that. Darren, have you got any real world scenarios that you could perhaps share with us in terms of if you've got somebody that's been off or taken time off with stress, something that will help an employer to defend potential stress claims or an issue, some kind of a contentious issue that would occur in the workplace?
Yeah, there's quite a lot, and without breaching confidentiality and GDPR and so on, there's two in particular that spring to mind where different clients of ours have actually been prevented from paying a lot of money out through claims. One of them was a claim that came into the company, an ex-employee then that had already left, and the health and safety executive came and visited him. And what the claim was basically going around was some of the issues that they'd suffered in the workplace and the fact that they'd never had any occupational health assessments of anything in the years that they'd worked for that company. When the health and safety executive came in, the managing director was quite fortunate. They had got occupational health assessments, and so the inspector asked to look at him, and they got 10 years of records of where this individual had annual occupational health checks and so on, where these types of questions had been asked by occupational health professionals. It was a quick win, really, because the health and safety executive were happy that the company were doing what they were doing, closed the case. The insurers closed the case, so basically it didn't go any further, and that was all down to having records in place. Another one that springs to mind is where somebody, it was quite a serious accident in a slight shift of time, which health and safety is a big thing, slight shift of time. If it had happened 5 minutes ago, it could have been a lot worse. But it impacted on this individual, as I just mentioned, slight shift of time of about probably 30 seconds. There had been a difference between a near miss and a fatality. And again, it was escalated, but the company weren't prosecuted. They weren't taking any further forward. Reason being, they got statutory inspections in place. So it was a piece of machinery. The time the accident happened, the statutory engineer came up and did the statutory inspections inside that machine office safe about an hour and a half, 2 hours before the incident happened. So it was escalated to them more than our client. The client had got the training records in place, the previous checks had been completed, risk assessment, safe systems were all signed off by the operatives. So the client had done everything they could. It was escalated to the service engineers that they recruited to come in and service and maintain the equipment. So it's good to have records in place because it prevents a lot of heartache. Because as you probably know in employment law, Richard, and it's definitely a case in health and safety, that because of corporate manslaughter act in health and safety and environments and all, these fines compared to probably 5-10 years ago can take companies out of business. These 6 figures, 7 figures, some of them are.
And would you say that with the right plan, with the right paperwork, are these claims avoidable from your position?
It doesn't prevent accidents. We're all human beings. We all have bad days. We all probably preoccupied, going back to what we were saying earlier on. We don't know what goes on in people's lives. You could be worrying about a close relative that's got ill health or anything. Like could be financial issues. So paperwork will not prevent an accident or an incident. It's down to human error or something happening. What it does prevent is the heartache of months and months of being to investigations. It's too late once the accident's happened. You can't backdate documents. We have been asked as a company in the past by, luckily enough, not clients of ours, or certainly not clients of ours anymore, where they've had an accident and they've panicked and they've said, oh, can you backdate a risk assessment and do a risk assessment? No, it's not happening. If you want to spend a bit of time under the King's custodial, then feel free to do it yourself. BPA certainly not going down that route. People panic and directors panic and so on. Get your documentation in place. It doesn't cost as much to get your documentation in place or have a consultant than it will when things go wrong. And people have asked us sometimes when we put quotes in for them, and so that's a lot more than I expected and so on. But it is what it is. There are people cheaper than us out there, like I know there is with you, Richard, but we've got our standards. We have to make sure that people are as safe as they can be. And I say to him, the thing is, we don't know what we cost, because if we do our job right, and we can only advise, we can't enforce them to do it. We're not inspectors, we're not the HSE. We can only advise them, but as long as they follow our advice and so on, then we don't know how much we've saved them. Because if we prevented one accident in 12 months, we've probably saved them £300,000. But it's the unknown.
Exactly that. And we frame it in a very similar way at Order Employment Services. We're there to make sure that as an investment, we can avoid a cost later down the line. And with anything legal, it's not what you know as a business leader, it's what you can prove. So those processes, those procedures that you've been talking about there, Darren, the risk assessments, making sure you've got policies in place, that's one of the ways that as an organisation, you can protect your organisation from future pain, such as a six-figure payout. And for a much more modest investment in utilising the services of BPA or OESHR, it's a lot more likely that you can avoid those situations in the first place. And as a business leader, I'm really here to give business leaders peace of mind to know that should a situation arise, and as you say, you can't prevent we're talking about outliers. It could be a single person that creates a challenge within your workforce. But I always suggest to our clients that it's best to be ready rather than react to those challenges in the first place. And from a business leader's perspective, we don't expect a business leader to know about employment law and all the regulations that they're subject to, as I'm sure you wouldn't as well from your clients. But I think the key message really is people don't know what they don't know. And I think today's session really is about educating them about what would be some really hot topics that employers are facing at the moment, hence why we're talking about it, and what they can do from a joined up approach as far as how do they address their people operations requirements, the people strategy and the HR, but also how that overlaps with health and safety and things that they can do, such as your risk assessments, making sure that there's a policy there and that you getting advice from a trusted partner who's had a lot of time in the industry that understands the challenges that businesses face. Yeah, I think 100% on board with that. I think the key step initially is build up the paper trail, make sure that you've got the policy there, but also manage it proactively, make sure there's training in place, make sure you've got somebody who's a trusted guide in that area that's had, certainly for myself, over 20 years experience, as I'm sure you have as well, Darren, that can guide you through step by step in a way that's very user-friendly and ultimately we're there to respond rather than react to these situations or put business leaders in that position in the first place. So that's a great segue, Darren, in terms of the next part of our conversation today, which is all about, okay, workplace policies, training, but also what actually could go wrong within the workplace. And I know we're going to look at an actual study, a case study for our audience of listeners to just try and understand a little bit more about, okay, practically, what do employers have to do if there's a situation that pops up within the workplace? So we're going to look at a situation where perhaps there's some kind of a warehouse accident or an incident at work, which is RIDDOR requirements. And if you wouldn't mind just expanding a little bit more on that, what an employer is expected to do. And then from a HR perspective, I can also go into a little bit more detail about from a process perspective, what's your people strategy in situations like that as a business leader? Have you got any incidents or areas perhaps where there's been an investigation or an accident that we can use as a case study in this situation, Darren?
Yeah, I've got a perfect one. We've got a client they had somebody who started work with Monday morning Did the induction, as they should, because they've got a full-time health and safety manager on board, as well as us supporting their full-time health and safety manager. So they did the inductions and everything. But unfortunately, on day 2, on the Tuesday, this person had quite a serious accident.
What happened?
Again, without breaching confidentiality, they basically had 3 toes crushed by a piece of machinery. They were wearing safety shoes as they should. The pressure of the machine far outweighed the capability of the steel preventing it. As with most of these things, there's mass panic and we get the phone call. So what we did, obviously the first thing we always do, and we ask the clients to do, is make sure that person's okay. That's the utmost thing before we even look at anything else. Was that person okay? If they had the right first response, the first aid, paramedics, or the escorted to the hospital? Have the next of kin been informed so they're aware and so on? Again, one of the first things we ask them to do is isolate the area so nobody can go into that area, because the key thing is the investigation. Part of the investigation, sterilise the area, make sure nobody goes into that area, and then either us who come in or their health and safety consultants or their health and safety manager, whoever they use for their health and safety. Plenty of photographs of the area as it was at the time of the accident. Making sure the first aiders who completed the accident book, getting witness statements, get them as soon as possible, because what you don't want to hear as an investigator is, I heard this happened. Not interested in what you heard and what you saw. And this is not to appoint blame or to try to protect the company or anything. It's solely to find out what went wrong, what was the reason it went wrong, was everything in place that should have been, was the person trained and competent to carry out that job, were they doing the job that their job role is, so i.e. were they following their contract of employment, or were they operating something they shouldn't have done, were they wearing the correct PPE? And what we try to do then is build up a picture to find out what the root cause was. This particular accident I've just mentioned, when we carried out the investigation, the actual root cause of that accident was 5 days prior to that. And it was a combination of failings in a process from different people that resulted in that person having the accident. So things were put in place to prevent that happening again. And that's what it's about. It's about finding out the root cause, looking at lessons learned, and that's either re-educating people, looking at your safe operating procedures, do they need changing? Does the way the risk assessments are set out need changing? Whatever, and then learn from it, try to prevent that same accident happening again. Because if you don't do that, then you failed in your duty. You've not taken it serious. Potentially you could have a similar accident or the same accident further down the line. And then it starts getting messy then, because, as I said, claims, fines and things. And we talk about fines, but claims as well. It's all right saying that we're insured, but insurance premiums go up. And businesses are facing enough challenges financially with everything that's going on in the country at the moment, where all the costs are going up. So if we can prevent that, and yeah, if it happens, then we don't want any accidents. But whatever you put in place, you're going to have an incident or an accident. But it's trying to make sure, let's make sure we've got everything in place that we need to have in place. Let's make sure these people are trained properly, given the correct support that they need to do their job. And that's what it's about. So that's where we come from. We support clients with the investigations. We'll do the investigations. We'll ask the auditing questions. We'll liaise with the health and safety executive. And the other thing to bear in mind as well, the last few cases we've been involved in, it's not just the health and safety executive that comes to your factory or your warehouse. If the person's being taken to hospital and it's a serious accident, the police turn up as well. Because what the police are looking for is, has there been any criminal activity that's gone on? Has there been anything that's malicious that's happened, or was it a workplace accident? So they're doing their investigation and they're asking the same questions. They're asking for your risk assessments. They're asking for they're taking witness statements, sometimes under caution. So they're doing that. The HSE are doing their investigation. Once the police are happy that it's not life-changing injuries, fatality, once they're informed from the hospital, they're happy that things are in place and nothing malicious has happened, then fair enough. I'll leave it to the HRC to look at what they need to do for that investigation. And as a business owner, as a manager, I've had these phone calls and it makes you feel sick to your stomach because the first thing you do is think, have we done everything we need to do? So I don't wish anybody to be in that situation.
Absolutely. I think from a HR perspective, it seems to me from what you've shared there that we're talking about a potential like a warehouse accident, but it could also happen in other situations as well. We spoke at the beginning of the podcast about mind health and looking at stress at work. Stress at work is a health and safety concern in itself. So it's about making sure that you've got the right processes in place. But coming back to what you were saying there about the sort of accidents, incidents, and investigations, I think one thing that's really clear, and for me, the takeaway really is, don't wait until there's blood on the floor, whether that be literal or metaphorically speaking, to define people's roles and processes in how to avoid these situations happening in the first place. It seems to me that the health and safety is about establishing and handling the facts of what actually happened, but then we get involved from a HR perspective from the people side. So has there been some form of negligence where somebody has been trained to do something? And again, we can train them in terms of how to follow process correctly and make sure that they've got the right management training in place so people are leading. I always say to business leaders, the reason you're called a leader is because you're the one who goes first. So it's about making that decision of going first with, okay, we need to build policies, we need to build systems, we need to make sure that as a business we're protected, making sure, like you were talking about earlier, it begins from day one. So what does the induction look like? What does the onboarding look like? But more importantly, you don't want to be duplicating things, folks. One of the things that we try and work to at OES, I say this constantly to our clients, if I can say in 5 words what some people say in 10, then I've achieved what we're looking for. It's about giving you very simple guidelines that can be followed, but also robust at the same time. So it's not draining your time and dealing with these matters before they become an issue for the business. So I think that's really important, and it shows the value really of having a joined up approach when it comes to not only the health and safety side, but also from a HR, from a people strategy perspective as well. And it shows how those sort of pieces fit into the bigger picture of running a business. With that in mind, one of the questions I get asked quite a bit at OES is around, do we support organisations that already have support in place it could be a health and safety manager on site? And I say, yeah, absolutely. We're there to act as a trusted partner. We're there to guide them through step by step if they've got any particular nuance, things that are a bit more specific that they might need some high level like HR director advice on. And we do that constantly. We're there to complement an existing team, but we're also there for more modest-sized organisations that can't afford to pay £60,000 a year to bring a HR manager in-house. So they much prefer to lean into OES's support and get fractional advice, but at the fraction of the spend as well. So is that something that you experience as well, Darren?
Yeah, there's quite a few of our clients that have full-time health and safety managers in place because they're of a size where they can, probably 200 plus people on site. But there's also a lot of clients that don't, for the reason you just said, they can't afford to pay the 50, 60, 70,000 pound a year salaries that is required for a full-time person. So what we find is, yeah, when we first go in and there's an health and safety manager there, they're probably quite standoffish at first because you can appreciate they're probably thinking, why did they come in? Am I losing my job or what have you? So the first thing we try to do is reassure them that we're there to support them. And as far as we're aware, and obviously we wouldn't be privy to that thought process of what the directors are thinking. But quite honestly, we've never seen a client finish their health and safety manager because they brought us on board. They genuinely feel that it's somebody supporting the health and safety manager. A lot of health and safety managers, unless they're recruited from outside, but a lot of companies tend to find that they'll bring people up through the ranks to do health and safety. They'll put them on safety courses and so on. They're great because they know everything about that business. Like I said earlier, when they started my career, that's what I did. So I knew everything about that business, but I didn't necessarily know that when our contractors on site, I should have been complying with construction regulations, which is now the CDM regulations. I didn't know what the fire regulations were regarding fire risk assessments, Legionella, asbestos. So like with yourself, you just mentioned, Richard, that you've got your HR managers, that they'll know everything about their business. They might not necessarily know what the government has said they're bringing in on the 6th of April or the 1st of October or something like that.
Exactly.
So it's the same with us. They know what they know, but because we deal in all sectors like you do yourself, we know what's coming over the hill that they need to know about before he basically bites them. And it's about that. And the other thing that health and safety managers have fed back to us as well is that they tend to get more done as well, because they might have had committee meetings or meetings with the directors or meetings with shop floor staff where they're constantly trying to make improvements and it falls on deaf ears. And I feel sorry for them, because I've been in that position. You're sitting on the fence. You've got the workforce hitting you from one side saying, we haven't got this, we haven't got that, we haven't got the other. And you've got the board of directors, the other side, saying we need to do this, we need to do that, and we need to do and the other. The feedback we get from the people who employ full-time health and safety managers is that because we're on board, things tend to get done more, because one thing we do, if we're allowed to, is chair the safety committee meetings so people are accountable. And if it's minuted, okay, we'll get it done, because if something does happen and it's being minuted and we've chosen not to do anything about it, then guess what? The fines are higher.
Exactly.
And you probably find the same with HR.
Yeah, 100%. We see this constantly. Great example, as you say there, it's about accountability. One of the benefits of having a trusted partner there that's guiding you through what is an absolute maze of regulation is that we can keep people accountable within the organisation that we're supporting, not from the perspective of we're trying to find areas that they're doing wrong, or it's purely from a supportive capacity. We're there to make sure we can guide them through it in a way. And it's much better, in my view, coming from a trusted advisor, a trusted partner within the business, than an independent party such as the Ministry of Justice. In my case, if it's an employment tribunal, the last thing you want is somebody making you accountable from an outside source that could also lead to 6 figures of fines. So from my side, that's the way we support our clients. We're there to challenge and support at the same time, with a view to avoiding these situations happening, rather than it coming from an independent third party. It's much better coming from ourselves. I think for another area that I find happening a great deal at the moment within HR circles is that we'll perhaps go out to support a client initially, and they may have labelled somebody HR within their organisation that doesn't necessarily have the skills or experience to deal with what would be quite complicated matters within HR. So it could be anything from letting somebody go if you're dismissing them, all the way up to if you're going through a redundancy process, or perhaps even if you're changing somebody's terms and conditions. These are things that require a trusted partner to guide you through step by step in order to achieve what business leaders are looking for. And somebody who's perhaps an internal office manager who's been given the task of HR and just been expected to crack on and go on and deal with it. We see that all the time, but we look at it as an opportunity for growth for that person. So we can partner with the business and give them the training that they need in order to achieve the outcomes that the business are looking for. So we see that a huge amount. Do you have something similar within your industry sector?
Yeah. On quite a few occasions, we do get asked sometimes where they've sent somebody on a 5-day course, health and safety course, whether it's NEBOSH, IOSH or something similar. And they say we've got somebody competent now. Now, don't get me wrong, these courses are brilliant. There's underpinning knowledge as the first step, but it certainly doesn't make anybody competent after 5 days sitting on a training course. That's the first step in progression as over the years. Experience goes a long way. I've been doing this 25 years plus now, and every day's a school day. I don't profess to know every regulation or legislation and so on, and I never will do, but I know where to find it. And I think that's the key thing with consultancy, people like yourselves, Rich, that if we don't know, we'll hold our hands up and we'll say, sorry, I don't know, but leave it with me. I'll go and investigate and I'll go and find out and I'll come back to you with the facts. Because what you don't want to be doing is giving somebody some advice and then finding out it's wrong. Just be honest. Just say you don't know. And managers and directors need to just be careful that don't assume that because you put somebody on a 5-day course that you've got that competency there now. Yes, they'll do you a job, similar to what you've just said, we are more than happy to mentor these people as part of when we go in on the retained visits, and that we'll educate and we'll train them, we'll mentor them. We're at the end of the phone. Because what our end goal is, yes, we have retained clients. We have had retained clients where we've got them to the stage where they don't need us anymore because that person is more than capable to do it then. And that's great. We've done our job. So it's not about trying to keep that person down and say, no, you can't do this and you don't know what you're doing. It's about, okay, you don't know what you're doing at the moment, but let me explain. And this is what we do. And let me shadow you. Let me see you chair a committee meeting or see you produce a risk assessment or a procedure and develop them to the point where they can go off and do it on their own for the company.
100%. Yeah, I think there's a lot of value in empowering the people that you're supporting as a client. There's a lot of value that you get from as a consultant that's supporting the business to achieve those goals that we've set out. We're very clear on if somebody's going to join OES HR as a client, we're offering a tailored suit. We're not offering an off-the-shelf package at OES. So we're there to achieve the outcomes that each business is looking for. And the outcomes are different for each business that we speak to. With that in mind, we're there to empower whoever it is on site that's dealing with the day-to-day operational side of people management and making sure that they've got the tools to do the job correctly. But I think what you mentioned a moment ago as well is quite an important observation from my side. There is a huge amount of assumption that occurs within business. And I understand why that's the case. It's because people need to make decisions quickly. But there's always there's a sketch that Benny Hill did many moons ago about assumptions and about how assumptions can make an ass out of you and me if you break it down in terms of what that assume actually states. And it's bang on, whilst it's light-hearted, the amount of times I've spoken to people that have made assumptions that, oh, we don't necessarily need this support to begin with. And then later down the line, they've called up and said, actually, can we revisit this? And I've lost count of how many times that's happened over the 20 odd years that I've done this. And I think the key message really from me today is if people need to reach out to us, we offer consultations, we offer support. We do what's called the health and safety and HR health check, which again, I'll include a link at the bottom of the podcast today. So if anybody's interested in getting a bit more information about what we've covered today and really just testing the temperature of your organization to see where you stand in terms of your compliance, then fill it in. It only takes a few minutes to complete and hopefully it'll save you a huge amount of time in the long run in terms of, avoiding some of the things that we've spoken about today.
What I want to do, Richard, is just go back on what we've seen. We spoke a lot about employees, about making sure companies look after their employees with the induction, training, development, and everything else. But what a lot of people tend to forget, unfortunately, when there are accidents or if something's happening, and I've heard it lots of times when I've been out on sites and so on, warehouses, factories, where employees seem to have this perception that if anything happens, it's the director, the managing director, or the director who's going to get fined or face imprisonment, which that's worst case scenario. As an employee of a company, we all have a duty under the Health and Safety at Work Act to make sure we're complying with what the company are asking. So if the company have got all these procedures in place, risk assessments, method statements, training records, correct personal protective equipment and so on, and that individual is found to be negligible, they could be facing fines themselves. So they need to be aware that it's not just the directors. And just touching on that, again, we've spoke about how we can support employees and everything. I've been managing director at BPA since 2008, as you mentioned at the beginning. It's a very lonely place. We've gone through COVID, we've gone through bad times, we've gone through good times. But as the managing director of a company, you might be stressed. You might be worried about finances, about keeping people in jobs, but you can't actually go out of your office and start saying, I'm worried about this, I'm worried about that. You have to portray the person that's strong. Don't worry about this, we'll fight through it, we'll get through it together and so on. Down, you might be thinking totally opposite. I'm not a business coach, so I'm not going to start saying we can discuss about finances. But one thing that I do, from experience of running the business for, 17 years nearly, and from the health and safety viewpoint is, it's not all about health and safety. We've mentioned mental health, wellbeing and so on. And I'm more than happy, and the office also is there. It's been there with people that I work with. Like during COVID, when Boris Johnson announced 5 years ago today that we'd all got to go into lockdown, the first thing I did is contacted all the managing directors of every single one of our clients just to ask if they were all right and so on, and offer them support. Stop paying the retained fee until you're back into the business, so they didn't have to worry about the finance side. But I rang them at least once a week to check in, are they okay, or the family's okay, this, that, and the other. It's not all about business. It's about human beings.
Exactly.
So if there's anybody out there, but the clients are not of ours, we have retained clients, we do RIDDOR, we do support. But if there's any business owner out there or director that's in that position where they express the feelings because they're the one that's got looks strong and so on, I'm always happy to be a mentor and listen. I'm a very good listener. I don't judge people. So that's out there as well, because they need to look after their own mental health and well-being as well, because without them, somebody else has got to lead the company, and you might not necessarily have somebody else who can lead the company whilst you're out of it. Look after themselves as well.
Yeah, I think ultimately, the only way you can support others is by making sure that you're not pouring from an empty cup, and it's about making sure that cup is full enough so you can support others. We do exactly the same at OES HR. We offer mentorship as part of the retain packages that we offer. And we're there with HR, similar to health and safety, it's not only about policies, it's about people. And your people are the beating heart of your business. They're how you can do what you do as a business leader. And as you say there, it can be quite an isolating place as a business leader sometimes. So it's important that you can lean into expertise and lean into support really from an independent third party that isn't there to judge, but is there to support to achieve your aims as well. So with that in mind, folks, if you do need to get in touch with us on the back of today's podcast, I'm going to include a link in the description below so you can complete the health and safety and HR health check. Also, if you wish to book a discovery call with Darren and I, we'd be more than happy to do that. I've got a newsletter that you can subscribe to, which is Hardwire HR. You can access that through the link below. What about yourself, Darren? What's the best way to get in touch with you?
Best way is probably through LinkedIn, through my LinkedIn post, or email, which is d.bedson@bpa-services.info.
Excellent.